Hello, good day everyone. This is Gayula Iris Sargan and currently pursuing a Bachelor of Library and Information Science at Northern Negro State College of Science and Technology. So, welcome to my channel. So for today's video, we will continue discussing the Chapter 4, which is Survey Research and Sampling. Surveys are often used because they allow researchers to collect accurate information about a large number of people with a small sample size. So let's proceed to our discussion, Survey Research and Sampling.
Chapter 4, Survey Research and Sampling. The survey is a group of research methods commonly used to determine the present status of a given phenomenon. The survey literally means to look at, or to see over, or beyond, or, in other words, to observe. It was just indicated a key strength of survey research is that, if properly done, it allows one to generalize from a smaller group to a larger group from which the subgroup has been selected. The subgroup is referred to as the sample, and techniques for drawing samples will be treated in considerable detail later. The larger group is known as the population, must be clearly defined, specially delimited, and carefully chosen. It has been noted, survey research has characteristics common to most other research methods, but at the same time, it exhibits certain important differences. Survey research does not enable the researcher to manipulate the independent variable, provides less control of the research environment, and therefore this is not considered capable of definitely establishing causal relationships. In selecting a research methods, and a type of survey research in particular, the researcher must keep in mind the research problem, the sources of the desired information in the research. There are types of survey research which includes exploratory survey, analytical survey, and descriptive survey. In exploratory survey, it tends to discuss that the survey, often conducted as a qualitative research, it can increase the researcher's familiarity with the phenomenon in a question. There are specific kinds of exploratory research surveys. It include literature surveys, experience survey, and lastly analysis of insight-stimulating examples. When it comes to literature survey, it often focuses on developing hypotheses based on previous research that may suggest further research. In experience survey, as the same suggests, are survey that gather and synthesize the experience of specialists and or practitioners in particular field. And the third one where there is little experience to serve as a guide. Speaking of exploratory surveys in general, it is important that exploratory studies merely suggest insights or hypotheses. There are types of survey research it must be include cross-sectional study, trend study, cohort study, panel study, approximation of a longitudinal study, a parallel sample study, contextual study, sociometric study, and the last one is critical incident study. So let's move on to the major purpose of descriptive surveys. The basic purposes of descriptive surveys usually are to describe characteristics of the population of interest, estimate proportions in the population, make specific predictions, and test associational relationships. In formulating survey research, here are the basic steps that need to follow. Formulating objectives, selecting the data collection techniques, selecting the sample, collecting the data, analyzing and interpreting the results. Survey research design. Sampling. Before some standards techniques of sampling, it is important to have an understanding the following of the basic terms and concepts related to sampling. The first step is universe, population, population stratum, element, census, sample, case, and lastly sampling. Let's proceed to the types of sampling method. It includes non-probability sampling, accidental sampling, counter sampling, snowball sampling, purposive sampling, incomplete self-selected sample, probability sampling, simple random sampling, systematic sample, strategies random sample, and with a non-probability sample, the researcher cannot state the probability of a specific element of the population being included in the sample. In utilizing an accidental sampling technique, the researcher simply selects cases that are at hand until the sample reaches a desired, designated size. Some refer to this type of sampling as accidental sampling. It is an appropriate method to use when members of the population are difficult to identify and locate, such as migrants and homeless individuals.
Purposive sample.
The researcher would be making the assumption that such a sample would be reasonably typical of all university libraries involved in developing electronic reference services. A self-selected sample is a group of cases, usually people, who have essentially selected themselves for inclusion in a study. Incomplete sample, while not originally intended to be a non-probability sample, in effect becomes one. Example, if a large percentage of the cases selected do not respond or participate in a study, probability sampling enhances the likelihood of accomplishing this objective, and also provides methods for estimating the degree of probable success. Simple random sampling is the basic sampling method of survey research. The technique of simple random sampling gives each element in the population an equal chance of being included in the sample. A method of selecting a random sample that is considered by most to be as reliable and accurate as simple random sampling is systematic sampling. In selecting a stratified random sample, one must first divide all of the population elements into groups or categories, and then draw independent random samples from each group or stratum. There are two basic types of stratified random samples: proportional and disproportional. Essentially, the technique of cluster sampling involves dividing a population into clusters or groups, and then drawing a sample of those clusters. In fact, the population might already be grouped. Next is determining the sample size. Use of formulas, sampling error, and no sampling error. Formulas also consider the degree of accuracy with which one wishes to estimate a certain characteristic of the population and the variabilities of the population. The standard error of Themian represents how much the average of the means of an infinite number of samples drawn from a population deviates from the actual mean of that same population. Non-sampling error is difficult to estimate, but generally, as sample size goes up, so does non-sampling error.